I think we're live. We are live from the UK. How's everybody doing today? I hope you're all well. I'm going to continue my little session today on harmony, intonation, the way that we sense it, and some of the geekiest things I know about harmony, and some of the psychoacoustic elements of harmony as well. I'm going to start with some questions that were asked last time. I'm just going to try to answer some of them. And the first thing I'm going to open with is I tend to use the word geeky a lot, as if it, was a really niche subject. And I guess it is quite niche. One of my friends pointed out that, harmony really shouldn't be geeky, should it? Because it's something that, makes up our life. And if you want to be a choral singer, if you want to be a musician, it's something you should always think about. That's from Logan Shields, who is now a countertenor in Chanticleer, and he's totally right. I think if you want to be a professional choral singer, if you want to be a musician of any sort of caliber, this is something that we can all appreciate and understand, break down, and really grasp and try to understand further. So for me, it's something I just really get excited about, and hopefully you get excited about it as well. As more people start to join, today I'm going to explore some of the dark art, shall we say, of psychoacoustics, of physics, of sound, the way that we sense it. And as a reintroduction to just intonation, last time we followed a system called just temperament, just intonation. It's the harmonic system of tuning. It's all based on this thing called the overtone series, and that's just here, the harmonic series. This naturally occurs in nature. It's kind of the music of our universe. It's in our DNA. And every single sound makes up more of these notes, more or less. And if we're making that low C on the bottom there, then all the other sounds are also present. We can choose to accentuate them or sort of dull them if we want to. But this is the way that we choose to tune things in VOCES8. I really love the examples of the last video, so if that's still up, do check that out. I played some back-to-back sort of things. I'm a big back-to-back sort of person. I love tasting stuff and flights and that kind of thing. The new thing for me is I'm really into coffee flights, into espresso flights. You can taste all different types of roasts. But of course, you're probably familiar with that with craft beer and all that kind of thing. So hearing things back-to-back, being able to hear the just third versus the equal-tempered third, one that's a little bit higher than the one that occurs in this harmonic series. That, for me, is really eye-opening. In fact, someone commented on the last video, I feel like my third eye has been opened. And that was quite a compliment, so thank you for that one. I think people have mostly joined here today, so I hope you're having a wonderful Monday morning, not back to work. Definitely not for us, but this is pretty exciting for me to be communicating with all of you. Another person asked, can instruments play in this temperament, play in this harmonic temperament? Well, some instruments can. The piano cannot. The piano is based on the equal-tempered system. So these thirds here, if we played a major triad, that's going to be quite a bit higher than the one that's on here on the harmonic series. Basically, the piano was tempered. It was split into 12 equal tones, equal semitones. So that it just made a lot more sense, and we could play music, lots of chromatic music, all that cool stuff. It's great, but it's a flawed system for sure. So in VOCES8, we really try to tune as much as possible to this just system. One of the most beautiful things, I think, some instruments can play in this temperament, and one of them is the natural horn, the French horn, and I've got some recordings of that. One of my favorite pieces, written for tenor and horn, it's by Benjamin Britten, and this is the opening of that. And you'll hear some really interesting notes, some notes that definitely aren't on the piano. They might be a little bit jarring to your ears, but just take a listen to this. just stop it right there. I think it's a great way to open the day, especially if you're over in the States right now and you're just waking up. That was played by James Baker. It looks like in his backyard. We have to be careful with some of the copyright laws, so I'm making sure to play only live videos. But as you can hear, some of those notes definitely don't fit on the piano. They're in between the keys, I would say. And what he's doing is playing notes only from this system, this harmonic system right here. And that's really a pretty touching thing for me, I think. I'm not sure what it sounds like to you. Some of them, like I said, a little bit jarring. There's some notes in between notes, but this is the natural way that our universe is made up. So I think it's just really striking. Someone also asked about the vibrato, and some Americans say vibrato, Brits say vibrato, Italians say vibrato. A million ways to say that word, I think, and all are incorrect, I think. But we in VOCES8 we strive to sing pretty much as straight as possible. But it's funny, we don't actually think about it that much. We tend to use vibrato as a color, and it's just one of the colors in our little toolkit that we can choose to use at different times. But yes, I think if you are vibrating quite a bit, it can definitely interfere with all these sorts of things. This is high-level stuff that we're talking about, different sense between notes. So altering it even just a little bit and wavering slightly does make a big difference, I think. Of course, I think singing this sort of music is way easier in a chamber group. We only have 8 singers. It's quite a bit more difficult when you've got 50 singers. If you're the Robert Shaw Chorale or something like that, it's going to be difficult to temper your third 14 cents lower than the piano. But it's something you can strive for if you so wish. Certainly, if the entire section does it, we're going to talk about section unity as well today, and finding the exact perfect unison and what happens if one person just slightly falls just a few cents flat, and that phasing happens. We'll dive into that later. We also had lots of questions about vowel unification and how it affects our tuning as a group. It definitely affects our tuning. It definitely affects the balance. And I've got lots of examples coming up that you can hear. Once again, that back-to-back sort of style where you can appreciate the differences in that. If we line up our pitches and our vowels in this harmonic system, we get overtones. We talked about that last time. Today we're going to delve into undertones. So basically the flip side of this harmonic spectrum. It's exactly the same. It's totally mirrored. I like to think of it like maybe a tree or something with the branches extending upwards and the roots going down. But it's all just rooted in physics, really. I've got a video to play you to open up our little chat today. These are my friends in a group called Instant Classic. They're a barbershop group. I can't stay away from the barbershop tags. And in fact, I've got a few of them coming up as well. But this is a tag called Clouds on Fire. And I want you to listen to the very end because there's some crazy harmonics that just pop out, mostly in octaves with certain voices. Sun goes down, descends the clouds on fire, the clouds on fire. So what I'm hearing is actually an octave up there, even though he's only singing this note here. So check it out again. Listen to this last chord. I mean, clear as day. There's an overtone popping out, which is really just the octave above his note. Beautifully tuned 9th chord there. So speaking of barbershop, we're going to use that to transition into this concept of undertones now. And here's a little tag that I learned. A friend of mine taught me in college. His name's Phil Spencer. And this one goes out to you, Phil. This is a tag called Close Your Eyes in Sleep. And there's a moment in here where we can tune a just 7th. Remember that 7th chord is the one that goes like this. Except the 7th that we're going to be using is 31 cents lower than this one on the piano. So if you look on the screen, it actually also is the 7th harmonic. If you go up 7 partials from the bottom there, and you look up, that B flat is going to be 31 cents lower than this one on the piano. It's almost a third of the way down to the next note. And so we're going to use that to our advantage and ring all of these chords now in this harmonic system. And we're going to see what happens on the 5 chord, the dominant. Close your eyes, close your eyes, in sleep. So that's one of my favorite barbershop tags. It's actually really easy as well, which is a good plus. You can teach it to anybody, and it's a great one to sing. For now, we're all going to learn this tenor part, the top part. In barbershop, they call that the top part, the tenor usually. And it starts, close your eyes, and you hold that note, in sleep. So it starts on the third, close, 5, 4, 4, 3. We're just going to sing along with it this time and see what happens. See if you can pick out anything that kind of catches you off guard if you follow that part. Close your eyes, close your eyes, in sleep. Now, if you're following that part, you'll notice that it actually intersects with another line that rises above it. And the funny thing about it is, if you're singing that true flat seventh, the harmonic seventh, you're going to really sync the note. If we just listen to the part by itself, you get this. That's really what's happening underneath. Or on top. What's happening underneath is this. And what that does is it creates an undertone on the tonic, or on the 5. So we get a happening underneath. It's quite subtle, but see if you can listen out for it this time. Close your eyes, close. In sleep. So it's kind of a phenomenon that occurs there where we think it's happening. We perceive that there's this 5 pedal, but actually it's not in the chord at all. There's a 5 really high above, up there, but definitely not 2 octaves down. And we're going to get more into why that occurs in a little bit. I think just barbershop is a great way to explore singing this sort of harmony. It's a usually quite bright, warm, clear way to achieve lots of overtones. And I can never pass up an opportunity to sing a gnarly flat seventh. Usually the opportunities are few and far between, I think, to actually utilize it. It usually sounds quite sour. As you're just listening to that top line, you could tell it just goes, close your eyes, and suddenly it drops, the vowel drops, and the pitch drops as well. And we have to do that. We have to neutralize the vowel in order to make the sound ring even further. Remember we talked about it last time, that Andrea's job on the top, she's our top soprano, our soprano one, her job on top basically is to neutralize all these vowels. So if the rest of the group is singing ah, she might be singing aw on top. And that just makes her sound even more like an overtone to fit in with the rest of the parts underneath. Let's see. So we went through this this gnarly seventh here, and now we're going to hear what it sounds like if it happened to be in a melody. You know, that last example wasn't too bad. Listening by itself, like I said, was pretty awful. But we're now going to listen to a part that has the melody. This is a bit of Christmas time for you here. So we get that nice ringing 7th chord there, right here. It's definitely a properly tuned 7th. I made sure that I used a program called Melodyne to tune all these vocals so you can hear exactly what it's meant to sound like. And that sounds like this. So it's a nice sound by itself, but if you follow the melody, it sounds pretty awful, I think. And so there's this concept called melodic tuning that basically says you shouldn't really use these just intervals if there's a melody involved, because it detracts from the beauty of the line. It distracts us because we think, oh, that doesn't sound quite right. Something was a bit flat there. So there's not very many opportunities really to utilize this in the choral world. There's some in barbershop, but like I said, I can never pass up an opportunity. So here was one example in the VOCES8 repertoire. This is a recording of VOCES8 singing. It's a tune called The Deer's Cry. It's by Pert. Take a listen to this section here. Pay special attention to this 5 chord coming up at the end. Christ with me. Christ with me. So I get the most fun line, I would say. I sang the alto in that one. And we're just going to bring it up. I think I've got, let's see here. You want this one. There we are. So this is a score we've got here, and I've just done a quick little tuning analysis of the piece, of just these few bars, actually. And so we're going to use E as our tonic. Lots of people asked us about, how far do you zone in on all the intonation stuff? Do you actually do an analysis? Do you actually write this stuff down? Sometimes I do it for fun. I would say that the group, there comes a point where you just are a little bit more switched on to hearing this sort of harmony. And we don't do it as much. We definitely stop and tune chords quite a bit. Barney seems to think it's about 60% of rehearsal. Answers range from about 60 to 40% throughout the group. So quite a bit of rehearsal time is spent on intonation. For my peace and sanity, I like to actually figure out mathematically what we should be doing, just so that I know exactly what's going to happen. But in this piece, we're in the key of A minor, obviously, but we're going to use E as our 0 axis. Everything is going to swing from E. It doesn't move very far because we're mostly moving in 1-5, 1-5 kind of motion. And we're just going from A minor to E minor over B, A minor, E minor over B, and then we have this E7 chord pop out. And if you look at the alto 2 line, which is the one that I sing, we get this nice clash, this nice rub up against the tonic on the flatted 7th. And it's really fun to sing because you can actually sync it quite low and the chord still rings, and what will happen is you get a low E subharmonic underneath it all, and that sounds like this. Christ with me. Christ with me. So if you were following the line itself, you might have thought, oh, that's a bit strange to hear, Christ with me, but actually listening in context, if you just listen to the chord, with me, you get a low way down underneath there, down there. So I'll give you a chance to sing along with that alto 2 line this time around. So it starts right here, Christ with me. Have a go, ready? And Christ with me. When you get to that D natural, sink it as low as you can. Christ with me. I'm sure you sounded absolutely beautiful. Another piece, one of my favorites in the repertoire, is a hymn that we sing. It's by Orlando Gibbons called Drop, Drop, Slow Tears. Here's our recording of it. gorgeous piece on our most recent EP, well, 2 EPs ago, I guess. And we're going to do a little analysis of this one. So let's see here. We want this page. And we could do this. This is the score. We could do something like this, where we have the soprano. We just have Andrea and Elle sing the exactly the same notes, right in the key of just E major though. Quite easy. By the way, we're doing this down a semitone in the key of E, even though it's written in F. We tend to change the keys quite a bit. We could do that, but the problem is, look at the bass line then. If we want to justly tune all these harmonies, the basses are going to have to shift all over the place, and nobody wants to make them do that. So something we might do to sort of manage the pain of the listener is something a little more along the lines of this. So we're tempering some of the thirds in a little bit. So we're syncing some of the thirds when we have them. Other times, if the basses are sharing the third, we keep them the same. There's a few times where I've circled where the things I've actually shifted some things around that are a little bit strange, but we might try in rehearsal. These are all things that, maybe I've thought about, maybe Barney's thought about in different ways. Maybe we end up recording a bunch of things and cross-fading in certain chords or something. But in the end, we get something along the lines of this. Nor let his eyes see sin, but through my tears. Now you also notice that final bar, though, the tenor has "but through my tears," which I've circled. So you get this little passing seventh, and this would be an opportunity to not use that just harmonic seventh. Let's take a listen to what it would sound like with that in. Sorry, let's go from here. But through my tears. So that final third is negative 14 cents lower than the one on the piano, but that seventh sounds pretty sour to me. In context, if you just played the chord, it's not so bad, but because that part comes out, it's considered to be a little more of a melodic material. But through my tears. It's a gorgeous piece of writing. So, I think a lot of us musicians, we get so obsessed with these notes on the page, how to sing them, how to conduct them, how to write them even. And I think perhaps we sometimes forget about the sheer wonder of sound itself. It's kind of a miracle that makes harmony or even a single note magical to us. And I think that's really what I'm trying to get through in this little session here, the magic of harmony. And so we're going to dive down this rabbit hole of psychoacoustic phenomena into something called undertones. And really, for us, it's all about perception. What do we want the audience to hear? What do we want them to feel? And ultimately, these undertones are a great way to think about, a really geeky way, sorry Logan, to think about this process. So there's a thing called phasing, which we talked a little bit about before. When a fifth isn't quite in tune, it's sort of, you get this sort of sound, and we're going to just take a little bit of a closer listen to what that sounds like when two notes just aren't quite agreeing. We have this quite a bit when we're matching with another partner. For instance, if we have two people on a part or something and the timbres don't quite align, you get something like this. To me, that sort of reminds me of a penny rolling. You drop a penny, it goes. Listen again and see if you can not listen to the pitches moving, but actually feel that sensation of the, and it starts to move faster. starts to speed up, and you can almost start to perceive a third pitch. So for me, I actually hear the root happen underneath. I hear buh come in as it moves down. And that beating, that phasing, it's quite rhythmic. It starts da 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 da, and then we sort of, it sounds like maybe like a leaf blower starting up or something, and then suddenly we have a pitch. And that's the beautiful thing about this concept of harmonic polyrhythms. I'm not going to go too far into this, but someone asked me a question about it in the last video. Harmonic polyrhythms are when you take any of these two notes here, and any of these two partials at the bottom. So let's say that we picked the third partial and the second partial. So we get an octave and a fifth. And so if we decided to do that polyrhythm, which is and we sped up, we just kept speeding it up and speeding it up, there'd be a point eventually where we started to perceive a fifth. It's crazy. You can do the same thing with 4/3 polyrhythm, like. I'm talking, you have to really speed it up. You basically need a computer to do this. And suddenly there comes a point where our ears start to think, and then we perceive a pitch. It's pretty incredible. That would make a fourth, the 4 and the 3. We just take the difference between those and we get a fourth. So we're going to go back a slide just to this undertone screen. So you can see here how it's flipped. The overtones are going up and the undertones are the exact reflection of that going down. So instead of an octave, then a fifth, we have an octave going down, and then a fifth from there, which is actually going to produce what sounds like the fourth. So let's just go to there's a really cool concept called, the best way I can demonstrate this is a concept called strobas. And what that is it's singing a single note, usually in the bottom of your register, but then you just put a little bit of vocal fry in, and you start to perceive an octave happening below that. So I'm just going to take a C here, for instance. Maybe a little bit higher. And I go. So what you're actually hearing is just me singing. Should go up a little bit even. Kind of comes in and out a little bit. Some days are better than others for me. Sometimes when I wake up, I can, if I am really low, I can get down there. And I've got some recordings of the strobas kind of sound. But what you can do is you can create sort of sounds like this. And you just it just sort of flips into it. So I taught you how to overtone sing last time. I'll now teach you how to undertone sing. So basically what you want to do to create the sound, it's actually not very taxing on the folds. A lot of vocal instructors ask people to warm up on very, very simple, light fries. They say to make popcorn sometimes like that. And that's just kind of the... And what happens is if you just add a little bit of pitch into that sound, you just get this octave that pops in. So if I'm singing a D... and the octave below just pops out. It's different than a technique. Some of the tube and throat singing kind of things, they're a little more guttural, that kind of style. And that can be a little more damaging if you're a Western-trained classical singer or something like that. I think it takes a little bit longer to get used to that style. But this kind of singing is actually, it's pretty easy to do. There's some people that have mastered it, and I want to play a recording of a group called, he's a bass in Sweden, in a group called VOCES8. And this is a tag where he uses strobas to sing down to a low contra A flat. So his name is Dieter, and I don't know him that well. I'm not sure if he can actually sing down to an A flat. I don't think he can, but he uses this technique to access it. So I could do it maybe if I wanted to sing a low C, if I was going like, and I wanted to do something like, I could do something like that. In this video, he very successfully executes. This is a little barbershop tag called As Time Goes By. The world pretty effective when you can do it well. That sounds very realistic to me. You can kind of hear him pop into it. And you get a lot of that upper overtone, sort of blade kind of sound. But what we hear, especially with the notes on top of it, completing the triad, we hear a low octave there. Pretty incredible. There's also this thing called the second subharmonic singing technique, and I can do it every once in a while, and I've got a recording of me doing it. I'm not quite brave enough to demonstrate it live on Facebook, but what happens is, if you can see this undertone here, so if we are singing this C, the first undertone happens just below that, and then another fifth below that we get this F that comes through. And you'll hear that here. I'm actually going to be singing this D again. So first you'll hear the D, then a D here, and then down there you'll hear the A. So check this out. So a little bit strange to perceive at first. When you first start hearing it, you're like, is he just making a motorboat noise or something like that? This is an even lower one that might even be harder to hear, but this is a contra E. Yeah. So in the same way that we can overtone sing and do the and sing all those upper overtones, accessing all of those, we can do the same thing with our voice and create these sort of shadows of that underneath. That's the negative version of that underneath. There's crazy ways to throat sing. I mean, there's so many different ways. I mentioned that there's the sort of Tibetan, the Tuvan style of throat singing. There's this thing called Kargara, which is the more that kind of style. I'm sure you've heard it, but I'll just play a quick little snippet of that kind of style. So he's producing these pitches, but what's happening is you're getting the ones way an octave below that. There's a really awesome group. Some friends of mine are in a group called The Roomful of Teeth, and they're just called Roomful of Teeth, not The Roomful of Teeth. They've won a bunch of Grammys. They're incredible singers, and they combine all these elements of throat singing, yodeling. I'm just going to play a little snippet of one of their tracks and hope that copyright doesn't come to bite me. This is a tune called A-E-I-O. So incredible sounds there. Definitely check out Roomful of Teeth if you haven't. They do some totally gnarly stuff, as I said earlier, with that seventh. Definitely in the same gnarl realm as that flatted seventh for sure. So we're gonna also get into some different types of undertone singing. So we have this one that we can do by ourselves if we have the time. I guess we all have plenty of time to pass now to learn this kind of thing. But there's also something we can do with someone else if you happen to be in isolation with a friend or something like that. There's this cool thing called combination tones, where if you sing two notes together, quite a loud dynamic, you start to hear a third voice emerging, and usually it's below the pitch. I've done some shrieking sounds in my falsetto in the hopes that you can hear some roots start to emerge. So just take a listen to this. Yeah! Yeah! What I want you to listen for is a voice that goes D, D. There's no one singing that, but it's pretty faint. But just take a listen again. Yeah. So these are pitches that no one is singing. Just two people do two notes. We have the top one and the. Here's another one here. Kind of thing happening in the bass. A phantom voice emerging. So we can also do things like have a really, really low, like a note that is completed in a triad. Check out right here. Duh. And if we have a third voice, actually, we can sing full triads with that phantom voice completing the root below. So I guess it's an angel from above, or maybe from below since it's coming from below. But a third voice definitely coming out of that texture somehow. It's pretty crazy. I also want to just have a quick little moment to think about some of these really complex sounds, because the voice is very complicated, but we often hear sounds like this. This is a pretty common one. I mentioned harmonizing with our clocks and with our microwaves and fans and stuff like that, but sometimes I'm pretty struck by the fact that I just can't decipher a pitch when it sounds like there's, one or two happening, but which one is it? Da, 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 da. And it takes a moment to just sit down and break apart the sound. I think in that one, if you asked me, I hear an E low, and then I hear an F high. So I kind of get that sound from... And I think together that makes a combination tone. It basically creates a timbre. We associate that. We instead of thinking of two notes, we just think of it as one. Another really fun example is the bells of Westminster and Big Ben. When you strike Big Ben, there's a plethora of harmonics that just explode from the bell. And I want you to just take a listen this time. I've set the scene. Take a listen to Big Ben ringing, and when actually the big, apparently the bell, the big one at the end, is actually called Big Ben. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I'm probably incorrect. I'm always incorrect about these sorts of things. But at the end, I want you to listen to all the overtones. It's going to strike 12. And see how many notes you can pick out. I think I can pick out at least 6 or 7 individual notes that I can hear, overtones or initial strike of the bell. And just see if you can hear those out. I'll stop it there. You can definitely find examples of that online, but there's just so many different sounds that are being created there. Just like the human voice, which is also a very complex instrument, and there's not a single two voices in the world that are the same, which is incredible. Every single person that's been created doesn't have a voice like anyone else. It's insane to think about. I also just want to spend a second talking about the reason why when you have these two voices that are singing together in the high pitches, like I just did earlier, it's called a difference tone. So what you do is you take the frequency of the high pitch and subtract the frequency of the second pitch, and you're left with the frequency of that low pitch. So as you move around, as the two voices adjust, whatever the difference is between those two voices, you get that lower pitch that emerges. So I was saying that voices are so unique. And just like these these bells that we're just tolling, I think. And there's so many different sounds in the voice. There's this cool thing that we're going to talk about. We had a lot of questions about vowels and how that affects tuning. And we're going to talk about formants for just a second. Basically, it's the vocal tract that gives us our unique sound. But that vocal tract also takes the fundamental harmonics of the human voice and amplifies it or dulls them to create what are called formants. And that's ultimately what sort of makes our vowels sound like vowels. So it makes an ah sound like an ah and an eh sound like an eh. It's the formant in the sound. So each vowel has its own formants, and often that frequency can be enhanced by playing with the EQ settings, on Logic Pro or something. If you just happen to boost like the 1000 hertz or something like that, you can get or you can do it yourself. So there's crazy things you can do with your voice and with your mouth to amplify certain formants and harmonics. So if I was singing just this note here, I'm sure some of you mess around with this, making just strange sounds, going like wow 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 wow. If you ever do the wah pedal, wow 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 wow, that kind of sound, you get these weird effects. But if you just can isolate them for a moment, that sounds the most resonant. Suddenly you hear this overtone pop through. So you get that. And we make these sorts of weird sounds actually when we're struggling. If we're in a bad part of the range, if we're just at one of the extremities, we're going, and suddenly all these weird sounds pop out. And they can actually affect the tuning of chords or the notes in the chords even. Similar to the Westminster Bell, we have just all these different frequencies coming out. And you'd have no idea what to make sense of the tonic, where it is, where the fundamental is. So first of all, a quick little example of what the triads in just harmony sound like with different vowels just on the third. So first of all, we're going to have a fifth on ah, and the third's going to sing ooh, and we're just going to see what that sounds like. So that third is on ooh, clearly singing ooh. If you listen again to just the third, it sounds quite dulled and actually quite nice. If we put a note in singing ah, like the rest of the parts, like we would expect, it sounds like this. So that's ah. And then if we just happen to put something in like ah, we'll see what that sounds like. So here is ah on top. So totally different ringing there. Let's just go between all three of them and you can hear the differences in the sound. So here's the first example, the ooh. Here's opening to ah, and here's opening to ah. Ooh. So it definitely affects the way the chord rings. I don't really have a problem with ooh, actually. I think it's on top of the texture. Like I said, if we sort of dull the vowels as we move up, if we neutralize them, it's not so bad if we have someone going ah, and on the top someone's going ah. That's the whole concept of modifying vowels in the first place. So here's an example of a justly tuned major seventh chord. Great chord. So you hear that on top there, just like existing sort of like a whistle. Now, if there was a member of the choir that really liked to overtone sing or just had a problem with his ah vowel and started making a sound a little more similar to this. I don't know, maybe it was just really high for him or something. He was just like or something. Maybe we just have obviously these are extreme examples here, but let's just see what happens if we get that flat seventh emerging with the major seventh in the chord because someone couldn't sing the right vowel. hear that, and someone singing, but we get in the whistle above. So big clash there. I mean, that's once again an extreme example, but these sorts of things do pop out every once in a while, and this is why certain vowels just don't match at all. What's this example down here? So there's a singer that I found a few years back, Lawrence Brownlee, and he's a tenor, extreme capability of singing into the highest part of the range, and he had a recording of a Mes Amis that I watched, and it just totally popped out to me, struck me that I was hearing a loud whistle above the note when he was singing the high C. Here's the recording of that. Incredible voice, but if you can hear that, it's really, really high. It's like kind of the thing that dogs would hear. And there's there's not lots of singing teachers, but there's some singing teachers that go on about which formant exactly we're accessing, and it's always the difference between, especially in tenor voices, the fifth and the sixth formant usually, and he's got a pretty dominant sixth formant resonance, so that would be that'd be the fifth. Eventually, when you add up all those harmonic series, you get to the fifth. Let's just take a look and make sure that's correct. Right, so if he's singing a C, which he is actually, if he's singing that low C, he's not singing that low C, way up on the sixth formant there, you get a fifth, you get a G. So what's going to happen is he's singing, so you get one octave above that, and then above that, another fifth. So it's going to be an octave above that. You'll hear the whistle happening. You can hear that sort of whistly sound moving in sync with his vibrato, which is kind of cool. And that's called the singer's formant. We also call it, squillo, blade, edge, cut, all these different words, mask resonance. But what that does is it's a very high sound that can cut over the entire sound of an orchestra, a full orchestra playing. And what happens sometimes is if we accentuate that too much in certain chords, we get extra notes happening. So here's one example. This is just a good old minor 6 kind of chord in the key of C major or C sharp major. So if we're thinking like, I used to think that I could not go on. You just got that chord, classic sort of voicing. But one of the tenors here singing the 6 seems to just kind of not be able to get the vowel in the right spot. Can you hear an actual major third coming out of the texture? So you get minor and major third. Listen again. Not the most pleasant sound, and that's just happening because of this kind of thing. Just overclosing the valve so slightly. The same thing happens in a chord. Sometimes it can be a really beautiful thing where you can get sort of an added ninth in the chord, like this. So nobody's singing that. That's an overtone caused from the formant of the fifth here. By itself, it just sounds like a weird vowel. But actually, let's hear what you're hearing is this high whistle that makes the ninth in the chord. And I'm sort of playing with it to pull it in and out. One of my favorite examples is this one here. It's a dominant triad in first inversion, and the third has a massive major seventh harmonic. That sounds great, right? If you just get the nice dominant chord. But check out what happens. Against, there's 2 notes in the chord. And that's because of this guy. Can't get his vowel in check. So these sorts of things are really important for us, matching vowels and lining up harmony, balancing the color, balancing the sound. But all of this is something we think about all the time, because if the vowels aren't in line, then you can get unpleasant sounds. You can even get extra notes in chords, as I just sort of played some examples of that happening. So the most important thing now as we move on is actually balance. Balance is 50% of the equation, and we talked a lot about intonation, where to put notes in chords, how far to sync them. Sometimes if we're just dealing with equal tempered harmony, we just need to pitch them off the piano and balance them correctly so the audience can perceive certain things. This idea of the sonic pyramid is so important. We always talk about EQ in the ensemble, making sure the basses are the loudest as we move up, but it also definitely relates to timbre. There's so many ways to say that word as well. Americans say timbre. So this aesthetic of high floaty sopranos is all the rage in choral music, to make chords ring as true as possible in this harmonic system. But in order to do that, they have to be this overtone on top, and that's the reason why. Choral music is completely based around harmony and parts, people in a room together, singing together, making chords together. And so, opera is a whole different world, but as we move up in the spectrum, in the pyramid, the top parts, in order to gel with the rest of the harmony, in order to become one with the sound, you're going to have to be this shadow on top, this shimmering, glassy sort of sound. And the tenors have to do the same thing, the altos even more so, the sopranos most of all. So, in the end, we're just going to move to, you've already seen this stuff. We're going to move to some chords here. In the end, our whole job is to make sure the audience perceives the most accessible or comprehensible sound. So there's a collection of notes on the page. What are they working together to create? That's the big question, right? Is it chaos, organized chaos? Is there a fundamental root that's supposed to be ringing that the audience is supposed to make sense of? There's all these different things we can help them to hear, and that's kind of our job as the performer, or as the director, as the conductor of an ensemble. So we're now going to move into some chords that we have in the VOCES8 repertoire. And first of all let's see, what is the first one? This is a piece of Jonathan Dove, and this is a tricky one. So you can see it's basically D major with an added ninth, but it's in first inversion, and the top parts are an octave above the lower ones. So this is a snippet from the song. Andrew and Eleanor are balancing beautifully on that second on the top voice. So our job is here. We're in the key of D major. We're actually down a semitone because we sing this one down a semitone as well. Right, so we're in D flat major, and our goal here is to make sure the audience perceives, even though we're in first inversion, that they perceive D flat. They perceive D as the tonic. We all know this chord, Lauritsen classic. The problem is the voices are an octave up in the top, so we get this instead. Actually, if we lower the third to be negative 14 cents, we raise the fifth plus 2, we raise the ninth plus 4, just as we do in the harmonic series, then we start to get this low tonic ringing. It kind of sounds like a machine, like to me. Listen again. And sometimes in rehearsal we'll just have when we're in rehearsal we'll just have Johnny put that note in. So in this case I've put it in Strobos. that helps to just align all the harmony. The next example here is that's a recording of VOCES8 singing the end of Jake Runested's piece, Let My Love Be Heard. And this one, there's many ways to look at it. You know, you could see E major there or something like that if you wanted to. But actually we need to analyze the root and call it by name. Here's the chord. We could see, you could see something like this. So I'm failing it. We could see that chord right there. And see, oh, okay, well it's just E major, right? No problem. We'll just tune E major. The problem is that there's this A in the bass, so we have to call it an A major 7th add 9 chord. A major 9. And once we balance it, with the A is the most prominent note, and the third the next most prominent note, and then we have these just sparkles on top. The major 7th and the G sharp, and the 9th tucked in the tenor. We get, the audience is going to hear A. That kind of sound. That's the trick on that one. The next one, purling. Oh, I got some peaking there, unfortunately. But this is how that chord sounds. And actually, we were so hip, we recorded it between keys, it sounds like. So here's how that chord looks on the page. We're doing it down a semitone, for those of you that have perfect pitch. Now you could look at this and see G major and think, well, I'm just going to tune G major and then put the roots in, right? I mean, that's all I need to do. It's like, great. The problem is the most important part of the chord is in the lower parts. So we have to hear these parts ringing. That's the key to the sound. Unlocking the richness, and then from there we can start to stack the chords, stack the harmony. A very light major 7th. The 9th could be a little more prominent. Sharp 11, bounce back. 13, and another 9th. The 9th on top, creating the shadow of the one below. In the end we get this. Perling's famous wall of sound. And actually I don't think the E natural is his. I might have added that in to make it an 8-parter. We didn't record it, so any of you Perling purists out there, don't worry about it. It's intact the way he wanted it. 2 more examples to go here. So this one. I long to oh, one of my favorites there. Ah, great chord. That one, so this is a debate because there's different ways you could look at it. So I definitely hear this as a minor 4 chord, leading to the tonic, this kind of sound. That's the same kind of, I used to think that I would not go on. That sort of classic, grew up with Space Jam, so you can't hate on me too much. But that's the sound I hear when I hear this. So for me, the note that I hear underneath everything is this. Even though it's not in the chord, we do have it in the alto. We do have that F in the alto up there. And so it's important that we first balance this, for me, as F minor. So to do that, we want so there's our F minor chord. Then we can stick in that 6, not too loud, and then the most dissonant note of all, we get that 9th in the lower parts. Now Johnny thinks this is a 5 chord, which also has a great case behind as well. So you might hear this. Leading back up to there. To balance it like that, you're going to need to accentuate all the sus harmony in the chord. So we want that, obviously. Not that one. Let's go one more time. That's kind of a classic chord. We can all sort of make sense of that. It's a very accessible sound. You hear it a lot. Pop music. Just nice dominant sus kind of sound. But then we're going to put in this this flat 9 kind of sound. My money's still on a minor 4, but we'll have to consult Naomi Krellin. It's her arrangement. Maybe she just wants it to be a cluster, which is great as well. But we definitely balanced it as a minor 4 in that recording. So lots of things to talk about. One last recording here, one last example. So and that looks like this. It's the end of Ben Perry's arrangement of "It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing." A lot of notes in this chord. So listen one more time. Now you might look at that and say, "Well, I see D major in the top. I think I'm just gonna have to balance that. Yeah, just that D major. You know, that's obvious. Well, you can do that if you want, but so you'd want these chords." The problem is, once again, if you're looking at the harmony, we have to look for these tritones, these dominant voicings in the bottom parts. And this is what we really need to come through. So all in all, we need to hear that tritone sub coming through down here. That sort of harmony. Then we can start to add that sharp 9. And the really dissonant note of the sharp 11. And then we have our chord. This tritone business is difficult because if you have a 3rd and 7th in the chord, you could either call it a diminished chord, but they all sort of lean somewhere. Every diminished chord kind of leans in a certain direction. And this one, for instance, I'm just going to play one more example, then I'll wrap this up here. But this example here is a rootless voicing. So there's no, I haven't unfortunately got a, oh, I do have a little slide here. So, and also sometimes you see them in these weird spellings. So this might look to the person performing it as a cluster or something like that. But actually, if we look at this, we've got our tritone there in the lower parts, and that's going to be our third and 7th. We're not exactly sure which 3rd or 7th it is yet, because it could be. So we have these two notes. It could be that sort of sound, or it could be that sort of sound. One of them leads here. Right? And the other one leads here. So we kind of have two gateways to choose. So if I just play the chord by itself, sounds like that. Now depending on what root I put in, it'll take a certain gravity to swing the chord into where it wants to lean. So first I'm going to put this root in, which is going to be an F. And that has to, but that's where it feels like it leans to me. It could go any different direction. It could go to E if you wanted, if you're being really, really spicy. But for me, it's a 5-1 sort of action, dominant leading to tonic. If we decided to sub out the tritone, the exact same thing. This time we're going to put B as the root, because remember we have two different avenues we can take with this source of chord. We have these notes in the lower parts, so we went here last time, but we could go and resolve it to there. So this time we're just going to try that second option. Put a B in. Kind of sound. So ultimately it depends on where you're going. If this is a dominant chord, it's going to resolve usually to tonic, and we have to make sure that not only do we know the chord that's happening, we can't just name the chord, we have to know where it's leaning. So ultimately I think we talked about a lot of things. We've talked about undertones and overtones and balancing chords, crazy psychoacoustic phenomenon, and I think in the end the takeaway really is that all of this stuff can help you to make sure the audience can perceive what you want them to hear. So if we want them to hear a B in this chord, we can balance it like there's a B in the chord, moving to E, even though there's not one there. If we want to have that Jonathan Dove chord with the lower third, high fifth, that nice sort of shimmery, that chord, if we want them to hear that in the bass, then we have to tune it in that certain way. We have to balance it in that way. And it's so important because it informs where we are and where we're going. And ultimately, that's music. It's tension and release. So I hope this has been somewhat beneficial, definitely geeky. And if you have any questions, drop me a line. I hope you're having an awesome time, and I hope it was exciting for you to hear some crazy chords. Take care, guys. See you soon.